every single person and their mother is getting signed in the NHL right now, which means we might not even have a free agent to talk about when tomorrow rolls around. But I want to go through all the major stories we just got recently, with Mitch Marner officially being traded to Vegas, with the returns confirmed, Aaron Ekblad and Brent Marchand staying in Florida, and multiple other massive deals. So make sure you guys watch till the end as we cover all the latest news here today, and hit that subscribe button if you're new as we cover all the major trades and signings over this summer. Now let's first start out with the Mitch Marner to Vegas trade. We've known about this for a few days now, but it's finally become official. On the eve of free agency, the biggest free agent is off the board because, of course, he is. But the trade package and what we would actually see back to Toronto was always kind of speculated, because initially it was heard that Nic Hague could be going back, and then Nic Hague, and then maybe even another pick on top of that. But right down at the very end of things, it's just Nic Hague for Mitch Marner, a 1-for-1 deal. But to me, this trade feels pretty fair, and especially for the Toronto Maple Leafs that were absolutely not going to be able to re-sign Mitch Marner, it's about the best situation possible for them. For Vegas, of course, they had lined up pretty much everything to be able to bring on a player with the presence of a Marner, especially at the AAV, an 8-year contract at $12 million confirmed. But for the Knights, they needed to make sure they got Mitch Marner and also clear just a little bit of cap space to make it even easier. With the Alex Pietrangelo injury, though, things really started to clear up for the Knights. But Marner was really the perfect fit, and I think is due for a bit of a bounce back in terms of his career in Vegas. Obviously, not the greatest playoff performances in Toronto, but a high-skill playmaker, something that with the, especially the assist totals over the last few years, especially with Jack Eichel, I see those two doing extremely well together. But for the Leafs, I think Nicolas Roy is a pretty fine third-line center for them going forward. Big size, of course, and a lot of playoff pedigree, being able to play with this Vegas team for so long. Hasn't really had, like, undeniable moments for them, but has been pretty consistent all around. Didn't really have a great 2024 playoffs, only 0 points in 7 games. But for the most part, you see 2023, 11 points in 22 games. In 2021, 9 points in 19. He's pretty typically a solid half a point per game guy in the playoffs, which, considering most of that Toronto team, I think you'll take that in your bottom 6. But something that I think just checks a lot of boxes for them, and hey, your third line center only making $3 million, I don't think that's too bad whatsoever, and gives them that little bit of extra room to, hey, go after another forward, which is exactly what the Toronto Maple Leafs did, going after another forward in a pretty similar AAV range at $3.4 million in Matias Maccelli. Now, this one to me was just a no-brainer for Toronto. They needed some more speed, some more creativity in that middle 6, especially when you look at the left wing depth after a Matthew Knies, who they just recently re-signed to that massive extension. They need to get some help behind them and actually make sure they can have some play drivers, have some speed, and in Maccelli's case, I like the bet. At 24 years old, his career's kind of been in a weird spot because he was trending so highly after his first couple of seasons with Arizona, but this last year with the team moving to Utah, it felt like the coaching staff didn't quite give him the same opportunities, and you can see 55 games, the production absolutely tanked, only getting 18 points. He's somebody, though, that coming into the move to Utah was one of the more underrated playmakers out there, especially along the perimeter. He's really good at finding those open lays somehow, even with the multiple layers of bodies. He's able to find these saucer passes out of thin air almost. And I think especially for a team like Toronto, they needed some unbelievable playmaking, especially with Mitch Marner off the team. Maccelli won't be able to equal Mitch Marner's output, but I think Maccelli is due for a bounce back and likely is a 50-60 point forward going forward. And considering the price, too, a conditional third-round pick, I believe it gets to a second-rounder if he gets to 51 points. There's a couple of conditions on it, but it's mostly performance-dependent. So I think for Toronto, it's not that big of a deal. At most, it's a second-rounder, and if it is, and if Maccelli's playing well, then I don't think that's too much of a problem. I think Maccelli has a lot of bounce-back potential, and in Toronto, I honestly see him capturing it. Now, we were talking about earlier in the Mitch Marner deal about another player on top of Waugh that could have been a part of the deal in Nic Hague. Well, we saw him traded to the Nashville Predators in, I gotta be honest, a pretty confusing one to me. As you guys can see, the deal ended up being Nic Hague and a 2027 third-round conditional pick for Colton Sissons and Jeremy Lauzon. And I guess in terms of the actual player here, Hague maybe has the best upside out of everybody exchanged, but it's just kind of a strange one for Nashville, especially when you consider the contract they gave him right after. Because when we actually got the extension locked in, according to Elliotte Friedman, the signing was 4 years at $5.5 million, which I understand understand with the cap rising, that's kind of going to be the new cost for these second pair type of defensemen going forward, but I don't think Hague is even a second pair defenseman in Nashville right now. You already have Roman Josi, you already have Brady Shea especially, who you're overpaying a ton right now, so then you overpay a player like Nic Hague to give $5.5 million to. I will say, one of the players that I think has kind of proven me wrong the most recently has been a Jeremy Lauzon, who, I mean, he's not on anything crazy or anything, but in terms of the physicality, the hits he's providing, I think he's fine in a third pairing position. It was the right side of the defense that I think Nashville really needed to focus on, really needed to target, and that's not doing it here. I think Hague is fine, but always somebody that I felt is a little bit overrated because of the massive size at 6'6", 240 pounds. He moves okay, but again, nothing about his game to me is really all that special. In Vegas, in a pretty great situation for defensemen especially, I just didn't really feel like he was ever at a premium level. And also, again, hasn't been able to score anything past, 17 points in the NHL. I know that's not everything when it comes to defensemen like Hague, but I just don't think he's on the defensive level either to especially warrant that type of cap hit. So I like this deal, especially for Vegas, having the assistance contract. If we get 50% retained, I like the bet there because they save a little bit of money, and I don't think there's too much of a difference in terms of the players either. So we'll just have to wait and see. I just think in Nashville's case, I was kind of expecting them to try to contend again for next year, make some big money moves. I think in Nashville's case, though, they're kind of in no man's land, and I am curious to see what else they do this summer because, at least up to this point, it hasn't been an inspirational one by any means. In terms of other defensemen getting overpaid as well, we got Alexander Romanov re-signing at 8 years, $6.25 million with the New York Islanders, and this one wasn't too much of a shock, but it's also a little bit strange, I think, in the Islanders case, considering how many left defensemen they have in their system, to give a player like Romanov 8 years. And I understand keeping him, I think, for like a 4 or 5 year contract, I would have been pretty okay with that, but it's a long term, and I don't think an AAV that is that much of a pay cut, and I just think for the Islanders in 6 years at the very latest even, you're going to have players like Matthew Schaefer, obviously there already, but it's Kashan Aitchison, and even some of the lefty options they have, like Zach Scholes, or Callie Odiolus, or Isaiah George, that could be able to play in those positions too. So to me, maybe there's still the case, obviously, that they could end up trading him down the road, but I don't know. The long term is just a little bit icky for me. But especially after they traded Dobson, I think they did still need to get Romanov signed unless they were going to trade him for some picks, which I wouldn't have been all that opposed to if the Islanders were to go in a kind of rebuilding direction. But I think Romanov's been a solid player for the Islanders, especially in a kind of a middle pair role. He's handled the minutes responsibly. Nothing, again, that's overwhelmingly good. But I think, again, for a second pair type of defenseman who logs the minutes that Romanov does, this is about to be the going rate with the cap and how much it is exponentially higher in the next few years. So I don't think it's an insane overpayment. I just think for the Islanders, it's a little bit more of a restraining move for their future, unless we are to see, again, a deal down the line. But at the end of the day, he's 25 years old. It's not the biggest deal in the world. I just think for the Islanders in general, making sure you have the space for the defenseman coming up, I think should be a priority. We'll just have to wait and see if it becomes a problem. Let's finally talk about Florida, shall we? Because they continue to pull off heist after heist. First, we had Bob McKenzie coming out of the cottage retirement to give us some breaking news. I mean, Bob is truly the best out there and continues to prove right why. He's retired and he's still breaking stuff. I love to see it. He says all signs point to Aaron Ekblad and Florida making progress on a long-term deal that, assuming it's finalized, would take the veteran defenseman out of free agency. And that is exactly what we saw. And then we got the official confirmation from Freeman about the contract terms, what they would look like. Sounds like this is going to be 8 years at $6.1 million. And this was just a bombshell to me, and a pretty surprising one, because even though you guys know in my bold predictions, I had Florida keeping all 3 of the core of Marchand, Ekblad, and Sam Bennett, still, to see this much of a pay cut is still pretty shocking, and especially at 6.1. I think if Ekblad were to have gone to the open market, especially with the right defense options drying up around him, I think he could have gotten at least 8, maybe 8.5, maybe even 9 if a team like Anaheim, with all the cap space they have, was crazy enough to do it. I could have seen a possibility of that, in all honesty, but Florida gets him at 6.1, and it's really hard to hate that. I feel like Aaron Ekblad's a weird one because he's always kind of judged differently depending on the time of the year. If it's October through April, the regular season, obviously he's not going to play a bunch of games, and when he does play, it's kind of inconsistent in terms of the actual on-ice impact. But then the playoffs roll around, and then Aaron Ekblad is at his best hockey, especially these last 2 years, playing unbelievable amounts of minutes, always getting past them efficiently, using, of course, that physicality in a massive way, and just leading by example. So in Ekblad's case, you know, the regular season, it's kind of like, okay, is this guy a long-term part of the Panthers? Are they going to re-sign him? And the playoffs come around, it's like, okay, yes, that's Aaron Ekblad. That's why he's going to get paid. But in Florida's case, it just made sense for everybody to stay. It was one of my bold predictions that the core three of Bennett and Ekblad and Marchand would all find a way because it's a great place to live. It's a great place to be. The team is unbelievable. Why not continue that? All your buddies are there. Great management. They'll treat you well. It's just for all those reasons, I saw them re-signing, and Ekblad was maybe the biggest surprise, but at the end of the day, not really. And then to make everyone and their mothers mad, we had Elliotte Friedman not just talking about the Aaron Ekblad extension, but then going on to say that Brad Marchand is closing in on a 6-year extension with the Florida Panthers. $32 million to total, so 6 by 6, and staying with the Florida Panthers. This one was also maybe not a big shot in Marchand staying, but the contract is absolutely wild. This is the only contract out of the three of Bennett, Ekblad, and Marchand that I would say the Panthers maybe sacrificed a little bit. There might be people saying, oh, the state tax kept them all on board, but in Marchand's case, 6 years at $6 million is a lot. I would have expected in the open market him to get more, so a 4-year, maybe 8.5 type of deal, $9 million maybe in Toronto, which would equate to around the same level, but especially that term is shocking because, of course, Marchand at 37 years old, he's going to be 43 years old by the time this contract is officially off the books, and that is one heck of a gamble. Of course, in the end, maybe Florida finds a way to dump the contract, but with what we've seen a lot more recently, with the NHL getting a lot more stingy about LTIR and everything in the next CBA, that might not come as easily. But I mean, at the end of the day, having Marchand there in Florida, this is still the cup window these next couple of seasons, and I don't think Florida in 6 years' time is going to be able to have the contention that they will have over these next couple of years. So why not do everything possible to keep this core intact and have another couple of kicks at the can? And it certainly worked out for Florida so far. But you can see what he was able to do with the Panthers in the playoffs, 20 points in 23 games. He was a fantastic fit, not just on the ice, almost immediately becoming basically best friends with everybody on that roster. Marchand is just a perfect character for any locker room, and exactly what the Panthers needed to once again get over the top. So in that case, even though it's an overpay and it's too long of a contract, at the end of the day, who the heck cares? But of course, the Florida Panthers find a way to do it. I would not expect this to come without some sacrificing. I would expect Evan Rodriguez to get traded and potentially a couple other names since Florida is so heavily towards the cap right now because of these contracts. But of course, classic Florida being able to keep the big guns there all together at reasonable cap hits. All things considered, Marchand's a little bit of overpay, but it's just classic Florida Panthers. But hey, when you treat your players well, when you run a great organization, people want to stay. And I'm not surprised or shocked by all these decisions of all these guys to stay because why not? It's the best place to be. The other piece of news, another free agent off the board, is Ivan Provorov. Re-signing with the Columbus Blue Jackets was not a big shock to me, but especially when we look at the contract details, that was the biggest shocker. Because as you guys can see, the Columbus Blue Jackets signed Ivan Provorov to a 7-year contract at $8.5 million. Provorov getting a big pay grade. And I get it, Provorov plays a ton of minutes. He plays them fine, I guess. So I guess for that, it's okay. Rising cap cope, I guess, is a part of things. But I don't know, man. Columbus is kind of losing me just a little bit here. Obviously, Columbus is trying to compete a lot more next year. They were pretty competitive, of course, getting really close to the playoffs this last season, but they really want to make sure they get that slam dunk selection. Of course, getting players like Charlie Coyle and Miles Wood onto that bottom six, and re-signing, of course, Ivan Provorov. I still don't think they're completely done. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if a Ryan Lindgren were to be signed in free agency or something, because, again, he just kind of feels like a Don Waddell type of player to me. But the Provorov re-signing, I think, is still important for that defense. He still provides some good attributes. I don't know. I just feel like for Columbus, they're kind of going in this much older direction a little bit quickly for my liking, considering how good of a prospect pool they have. They have some interesting options coming up that I think could fill those roles, but at the end of the day, again, I understand it. You want to make the playoffs. Provorov re-signing does help that. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you guys enjoy, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe and the notification bell. Comment down below your thoughts on all of these different moves, on the Marner deal, the Ekblad and Marchand re-signings, the Provorov announcement, the Maccelli trade, so much over the last day. Let me know your thoughts on every single one of them down below. Of course, share the video with all the communities you guys know online to get the news out to them, and click on this card for all of my trade rumor content right in one playlist there. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.